Hey there, person that listens to the show. Welcome back. I got another episode coming at you, and I'm cutting a brief introduction. Don't usually do that, but the second half of this episode, I don't know how much sense it makes. First 15 minutes, I think it went great. It was pretty funny. Second half, I think you'll get a little bit lost, but it's a worthwhile listen. And there are a couple things that I wanted to say. Firstly, I was not drunk during the episode. Talmud is exceptionally complicated, and on that note, the audience offered me beers. I said, I can't drink till after this. And they're like, what, you can't, they're a bunch of bullies. They're like, what, you can't have one beer? I'm like, no, I'm not going to be able to keep this stuff straight in my head. And then later on, when I was making the joke of, you see, I told you guys I couldn't drink. I wasn't saying that because I was hammered, and it starts to sound like I'm hammered. And here's the thing. I did my homework. And sometimes with Talmud, you can read like 4 lines, and you're like, all right, I think I understand this. And then you come back to it, and you're like, I totally don't understand it. With that said, also because sometimes you're in front of a live crowd, you can start getting a little bit nervous. I noticed my nervous tick, instead of using the word like, is I'll just start dropping the F-bomb a whole bunch. Like, if you watch me do stand-up, that shit's more put together. There you go, and I just cursed right there. Not that I'm against cursing, but there is something odd about giving a presentation about religious works and then, dropping the F-bomb a whole bunch. And on that note, for as much as I worked through these cases and think I had an understanding of it, I was never a great Talmud student. So my guess is if you showed this to a rabbi, they would tell you that I got every single piece of this thing wrong. So just a couple things to note before you get into it. And like I said, you can skip my introduction. The first 15 minutes are funny, or you could just skip the whole episode and come back next weekend when we're talking news. Or you might find this one fascinating, and that didn't even need the introduction here. But all right, first is I typically don't like making like religious jokes. If you're out there, you're keeping religion, God bless. I also don't even think I was saying this. I think the whole framework of if you're choosing to keep these laws is that people are trying to bring more God into their lives. For that, I support you. And in some weird way, I'm afraid of God and making fun of him. So usually, I don't know. This whole episode was done with love and showcasing that this thing is rich and complex, and that it's easy to pull things out of context. And for the stuff making the rounds on Twitter, I think, as you'll see from my brief presentation here, just how complex the document is. That's the first page of the Talmud. If you take a look at it, it does look like a Harry Potter wizard spell book. I will give that to you. And it looks weird, and I promise you, if this was a book about how to rob not Jewish people, I would have paid attention in school, okay? If this was a book about how to rob people, I would have more people here and you would all be leaving with less money. So I promise you that this, or maybe it's like I spent 10 years studying it, and if I just stuck around for the 11th, that's when they got into the interesting part. But if I had to break down what this book is, it's just a giant Jewy book of people going, wait, did that person actually say that? And when did he say that? It's all in Bernie Sanders' voice, by the way. The entire book is in Bernie Sanders' voice of someone going, and when did he say that? Are you sure he said that? He said differently over here, and what about over here? And then, I'm not even kidding, that's literally what the book is. And that, so I was trying to look up a case which is going to come up later, and this case is actually interesting. It's about when you buy a virgin, right? And I hope that I'm already starting to, make the Jews look more normal. But the case is, you go out and you buy yourself a virgin, and it turns out she's not a virgin. So you come back to court and you go, hey, my slut wife doesn't have a hymen, okay? So off the bat, we're having an interesting conversation here, okay? We can all agree that's an interesting starting point. So listen, if I was the judge of the, hey, my slut wife doesn't have a hymen case, I would be asking questions where it's like, well, did you sleep with her? Was she going out clubbing? Was she walking around the house going, shit, I fell into another doorknob? These are the questions I'd be asking, right? But instead, and this is speaking to what I was saying, the Mishnah is like an earlier book. They go, I got to stand up to read this, but maidens married on the 4th day said somebody, which, if I stand in the light, we're not going to be able to see it, attaches a Mishnah was taught to a Mitzvah, was not taught, which was taught and which was not taught. This was taught and this was taught, okay? So I'm literally not lying where it's Bernie Sanders Jewish talk of who said that, when did they say it, why did they say that, are you sure that they were saying that thing? And it's like, it's thousands of pages of this, okay? It reads like some weird fucking Shakespearean, like autistic-y, all right, anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. So to show you guys just how complex these things look like, That's a page on the left. And so what you basically have is the middle column is, it usually starts with a piece from earlier rabbis, and then it goes into, like, this will be earlier rabbis, then they start arguing about what those rabbis said, then these rabbis start arguing about what those rabbis say, and then it just keeps on going. It's just an ongoing thing where I promise you, anytime you ever see pictures of like rabbis are always sitting in front of books, all of these are reference books just to figure out what's on these pages. And so to give you an idea of how dense this thing is, if I were, so there's 2,711 pages, but pages are half pages. Like what you were just looking at, that's actually a half a page, okay? It's a 2-for-1 sale in the Talmud, where it's extra value, where every page is actually 2 pages, okay? And so just to give you an idea of like just how dense like these encyclopedic pages are, I spent 10 years in school learning this stuff, and if I wanted to spend 4 hours a day for the next 7 years, I would get through this once and I would be a blue belt in Talmud. Like that's, I'm telling you, that's the density of this shit, all right? And so to move on from there, to give you an idea of like some of the things that are discussed in it. So that was, I showed you guys earlier, that's the first page of the Talmud, and that's an entire tractate. It is 64 pages basically about when you say prayers. If you're going to pray, it's when you pray. It's got its own time system for the daily times. It's got its own calendar system. If you want to know why Jews are successful, it's because we figured out the math on when God will actually listen to you. That's what it is. Everyone else, they're praying at the wrong time. All right, other topics in this giant encyclopedia of a book is, let's say you got a brother, and your brother dies, he's married, and he doesn't have kids. So in Jewish law, you don't have to pull the Hunter Biden and have sex with your brother's wife. You don't have to do that. It's an option. You can do it, but you don't have to do it. The other thing that you can do instead is you can spit in her shoe. It's called chalitza, and if you want to learn about that, we've got 172 pages on that topic, okay? Here's other topics that you can explore. If strings that you put in public places then turn public places into private domain for carrying on Saturdays, there's 105 pages on that topic. Then we've got the Book of Damages, which is actually a little bit more relevant. It's like all kind of the laws for basically stealing for each other's, but like it breaks down to cases like, hey, let's say your ox gored my asshole, and then they'll be like, what's an asshole? What's considered a horn? How deep into your asshole did it go? It's not an actual conversation from the Talmud, but like I didn't pay that much attention. I just know. Next one, like, hey, your ox was eating my grass. Well, what's considered your grass? What if it was over my fence? Does grass go according to the base? Like I said, fucking Jewy conversations. Hey, I fell into your pit. Well, was that deep enough to be considered a pit? Was it even on this guy's property? How big was the pit? Was there notice about there being a pit? All right, here, this one's important. The other one's not that important. This is the giant book of, hey, my wife is on her period. Can I have sex with her? Because in Jewish law, for the time that women are on their periods, they're not allowed to have sex with them, and would include conversations where you run a cloth by the thing and you call up your rabbi, and he goes, hey, my wife's done bleeding, can I have sex with her? And the guy goes, well, what did the cloth test show? And he's like, I don't know, it's a little bit red. And the rabbi's like, well, what shade of red is it? And then you go, I don't know, I'm trying to have sex with my wife, I'm not gay. All right, so other topics, you can spend your whole life learning about what constitutes a blue string. You can learn about if a chicken laid an egg on holidays, if you can eat the egg, or, oh, this is a good one. This one's important for nowadays, and there's hundreds of pages on this, is if you're gonna bring a Passover offering, and let's say you're a dumbass, I'm a dumbass, so this would be relevant. You forgot which one of your sheep you designated for the Passover offering. Are you still allowed to offer the sheep? And this is hundreds of pages on topics like this, okay? Here's one that I remember learning about that I'm actually still a little bit mad about, was there was this law that you're not allowed to be alone with women, because if you're alone with women, they'll sleep with you, and let me tell you, the rabbis got that one wrong. If there's ever been anything that just got my hopes up, it was this one, because what will actually happen is you'll share hotel's room with women after you've taken Blue Chew, discover that they want to share a bed with you and don't want to have sex, and then wake up with numb arms. That's what will happen. And you'll sit there and go, you rabbi sons of bitches, you told me if I just got alone with this woman. And here, I actually wrote up in the style of the Talmud, what would be a more relevant one, which I call Tractate Blue Chew, which would deal with such issues as when going to a hotel room with a lady who you think is going to sleep with you, when's the proper time to take a blue chew? All right? So some would say it's arriving to the hotel so that you have charisma to get her upstairs, where others would say the proper time is once you're in the elevator because you close the sale, but it's going to take some time to click in. Whereas others will quote to you that there was an incident with Robbie Bernstein who took it once he was in the room and then still didn't get laid by a lady who wanted to share the bed with him. Okay, and then others rabbis said, well, why don't we wait till the first kiss, which they responded, even the first kiss isn't good enough because Rob had another incident when he went to the bathroom after making out and still shared a bed with a lady that just wanted to share a bed with him. The Talmud goes on to ask, why is it that some women just like sharing a bed? Is it because they like hogging blankets from people? To this, the rabbis replied, the real interest of women is in making men uncomfortable as it creates a sense of ownership and validation to having a person's attention that you aren't sleeping with. But what about women in cities that do sleep with men? To which the rabbis responded, those men are tall. Okay, so to take a look at some of the quotes that were actually making the rounds as if they are in the Talmud and reflective of what's in the Talmud. I mean, some of these read terribly. Like the one on the bottom, a Jew may have sex with a child as long as the child is less than 9 years old. I mean, listen, you've got bad quotes here. I'm going to say that, all right? These quotes read terribly. So just off the bat, before we kind of continue, and I will break down all of these quotes, I want to let you know I spent 10 years. There's 5,000 pages of the Talmud. I never once came across a single one of these lines. They are not, firstly, most Jews don't read the Talmud. They don't care about the Talmud. Amongst the ones that do, this is not the pinnacle of the faith, for one. Like, even if these were there, I'm just telling you, there's no one that's living there. This is not the 10 Commandments, okay? These are not the laws. And as you guys will see, most of these are either false or like recklessly taken out of context. But I will show it to you guys. Before we get into the actual quotes, I do want to give a little more context to the Talmud, which is, it was written basically, there was the oral law that started to get forgotten. And so a lot of the Mishnah, which kind of predates the Talmud, and the Talmud is basically breaking down, is attributed to this guy, Rabbi Akiva. And I mean, this is like nerdy more than you need. A lot of the Mishnahs, they don't actually have a rabbi attributed to it. Any opinion that's not attributed is attributed to that guy, Rabbi Meir, who is a student of Rabbi Akiva. Now that Rabbi Akiva guy, just to give you a little bit of context for Jewish life at that time, he was skinned alive by the Romans, all right? I don't know why that's funny to you, sir. And so this is about the same time as the Jesus story. And, you know, the reason why he didn't come back, it's not as easy to pull off that party trick when you've been skinned alive. And Jews, like, by the way, you just look at, like, Jewish holidays versus non-Jewish holidays, like, Christmas is so much cooler than, like, Hanukkah. It just is. Like, you guys do the lights, like, everything about Christmas. When you were a kid and they were running, like, those Sega Genesis commercials, you're like, my fucking holiday sucks, all right? And Jews, we're like, as good as we are with marketing, we're just worse with the holiday stuff. So the other reason, like, no one really cares or knows about this story is, like, you know, you guys got your guy all shredded with his long hair, and we just got this fucking Jew in the window going, I'll miss you. They're skinning me alive. I wish they wouldn't do that, you know? All right. The other context that I'll share with you guys is that it was written in Babylon. It's actually the Babylonian Talmud because the Jews had been exiled from Israel. And just to give a context to the anti-Semitism of that time was, I don't know why, when I was 14 years old, the first thing we learned about was how they had to move the date that Jewish women were getting married because generals were coming into town and going, oh, look, you're throwing a party. I'll just steal your food and rape your wife. I learned that at age 14, okay? So just to give a little bit of context to the anti-Semitism of that time, that if we were to find actual lines within this book that maybe didn't like non-Jews, I think it would be reasonable, okay? But with all that said, none of these lines are true. And, all right, in order to kind of explain that, there's this holiday called Sukkot, where basically, it's actually one of the fun ones. Jews, they spend a week eating their meals in these tents that they set up outside their homes, and there's like specific parameters for kind of setting up these tents. Okay, now right there, I've got a box, and as long as you have that box set up, you can actually kill non-Jews. That's not true. Okay, so this is going to be incredibly strange, but like I think it just adds a lot of context for understanding some of the structure of the way that Jewish law works, because it's just very different than like the way that we think about things. And that like firstly, Jewish law kind of talks in binaries where something can be true or not true. And once it's considered true, like you can kind of build off of that. So here's an example. In Jewish law, what you're looking at right there, for the sake of like constructing your outside tent dwelling, which needs to have 4 walls. There's a rule. You got to have 4 laws in order to build your outside tent dwelling. That's considered 4 walls. Now, we can all look at that and go, what the fuck are you talking about? That's not 4 walls. You can't put that up at the border. That wouldn't work, right? To none of us, that's not 4 walls. However, it's because you guys don't know Jew math, so I'll tell you Jew math. You ready? Because it's weird. Anything that's 3 fist lengths away from each other is considered connected, okay? And then also, walls are considered, within the structure of Jew law, to continue going up. So if you've got 3 strings that are just separated by 3 fist lengths, they're considered connected. Once they reach this particular height, they're considered to keep going up. So while you and I wouldn't look at that and go, hey, this is a wall, in Jewish law, that for the sake of fulfilling that commandment, that's considered a wall. So it kind of has like its own binaries and parameters. And then sometimes like when they're discussing things, they're just talking about it within a very specific reality of the Jewish law. No one's going to tell you that that's a wall. They're not going to tell you that it's a good idea to build a house with it. But for this specific commandment, if you're keeping it within the reality of the law, that's considered a wall. I get how weird that is, but like it gives a little bit of context to the way that some of these things work. The other thing is sometimes they isolate single principles in a way that doesn't read well. So this isn't one of Dan Blazarian's like examples, but it kind of just showcases the way that they would run through things. So I'll read the English translation on this. Rava said that this was a Mishnah. I know that's not English. An adult man who engaged in intercourse with a minor girl less than 3 years old has done nothing. So in English, you read that and you're like, okay, it sounds like in Jewish law you can have sex with a 3-year-old. That's the way that reads. An adult man who engaged in intercourse with a minor girl less than 3 years old has done nothing. That's what that reads like, right? But the context that you need to understand this is that they're talking about that, like I said before, it's weird, but in that time, virgins were worth more than non-virgins, and there was a price I think you had to pay to the dad. It doesn't matter. Anyone under the age of 3 years old regrows their hymen. They're not talking about that you have permission to have sex with children that are less than 3 years old. They're talking about the very specific financial policy of what a lady is worth when she's married. And so if you're having a discussion purely about the financial ramifications about the value of a lady, sex before 3 years old counts for nothing. Okay? Now I understand. We're reading this and we're like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? But the analytical Jews are like, all right, we're running through the parameters of the value when a lady gets married, and now we have to discuss they're viewing that in isolation. They're talking about the financial law. There's no comment here. Does that make sense? I know that it's fucking weird, but I'll repeat it. I'll talk about child sex all night if I have to. I want to make sure every person out here understands it and leaves less anti-Semitic than they came in. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish by showing you guys this weird thing. Does that make sense? I'm saying it's a purely financial conversation. They're not saying that you're allowed to do it. They're saying it means nothing for financial ramifications later on because broken hymens at age 3 regrow. All right? Does that follow? Or are you guys completely like, what the fuck are you talking about? All right, fair enough. I don't know. Okay. So with that said, and just I guess that's the underlining of what I just said, but I think you guys have heard enough about 3-year-old hymens. Okay, so just to recap, firstly, the book is gigantic. It's tough to understand. Nobody learned these random quotes. They're not the ethos of the religion. They bear no importance to anybody. The book has its own speech style and logic style, which I just kind of broke down, and you're getting, I studied this stuff 20 years ago, and I wasn't that into it. So, a rabbi might hear this and go, what the fuck was he saying? And then lastly, it's thousands of pages. It's easy to cherry pick random stuff, especially if you're taking things that are outside the scope of like the full conversation, because like in the last case, they could be discussing financial ramifications very isolated, and as they're breaking that down, the statements that they're making are not telling you that you can go do something. It's the same way that 3-string wall is not actually a wall. They're talking about it within the context of the spiritual reality, if that's considered a wall for your hut. All right, so I'm stealing from this guy, Steve, I'll put it in the description, and then I listened to this lecture from this other rabbi. Once again, this is my own interpretation, so, if they hate what I did here, I took nothing from them, but I'm just trying to give some credit to the source material. All right, so I'm gonna break down, I basically went through all the ones that were making the rounds, and I'll break each of them down for you guys. So the first one is, even the best of goyim should be killed. Goyim's a word for non-Jews. You take that and it sounds like, oh, Jews are allowed to kill non-Jews. If you look up the actual case, here's the line. It says, kill the best of heathens in time of war. And so what it's actually talking about is like, let's say you got a guy, I don't know, he's great at making shoes and he's attacking you. So even Jews, and you're like, oh man, I'd really like to buy shoes from this guy in the future. If he's attacking you, you still kill him. That's what it's saying. And it's actually, the reference is about when the Jews were being chased out from Egypt. So the full sentence, it's not saying, hey, you can kill non-Jews. It's saying in times of war, when they're attacking you, even if like they're good people otherwise, if they're attacking you, you kill them. All right, that one's pretty straightforward. Taken out of context. Does that make sense? All right, fair enough. I have no idea how just outside of the scope of what the fuck makes sense to people this is. All right, here's the next one. All children of goyim are animals. Doesn't read well. I'll give you that. It sounds bad. So remember when I was talking about spitting in shoes? You guys remember that one? All right, so there's a case in the Talmud of, let's say you have two brothers that convert to Judaism. Now, within the reality of Jewish law, once you convert, you're considered Jewish, and then anything beforehand is irrelevant. You just have like a new status of person. So they're not saying, I know it doesn't read well, what they're saying is this law is not relevant because they're actually the two brothers, once they convert, are no longer considered related. Like within Jewish law, your entire past, once you convert, you're fresh. People aren't allowed to ask you about your past. You're considered a Jew, and that's it. So if you convert along with your brother, you're no longer considered brothers. You guys have this new status as new people. So you wouldn't have to do the spitting in the shoe or choosing to marry your brother's wife if they didn't have kids, because none of this was relevant to you. They're not really calling people, they're just saying you have the same status in regard to this particular law. It's like asking me if a dog should spit in the shoe if their other dog, because it's irrelevant. This doesn't apply because you guys aren't instructed for this specific Jewish law reality. That's all they're saying. It's outside of the model. Does that make sense? All right, I guess not. All right, next one. Gentiles are not humans, they are beasts. What was that one about? I don't remember. That one also doesn't read well. Give me a second. You see, this is why I didn't get drunk, because I can't even see my notes here. All right, we'll have to come back to that one. I don't remember it off the top of my head. That one was true. You see? Did we call it? No, I'm kidding. The next one, God Shas, from what I understand, it doesn't exist. I don't know where he got that quote from. The next one, Gentile gore girls are in a state of nida from birth. Nida does not mean filth. It's what I was talking about before, that when a lady is menstruating, you're not allowed to have sex with her. So Jewish women are also considered in a state of nida until they're no longer going through menstruation and they go into a ritual bath. So it's not a statement about filth. It's just saying that they don't go into the ritual bath, so they're always in that status. All right, we're going to run through these quickly because it's not that interesting. Sanhedrin 54b, a Jew may have sex with a child as long as the child is less than 9 years old. Once again, doesn't read well. But what it's actually saying is that children less than 9 years old are not aware of the fact that they engaged in sex. So you're not stoned to death for doing so the same way that you would be for engaging in and by the way, it's so funny that to conservatives, they're like, oh, the fact that you'll stone gays is awesome. We don't have a problem with that. but the fact that you're endorsing sex with kids is the problem, and it's not. They're having a specific conversation about being stoned to death, which you wouldn't be liable for that punishment. So like when they're talking within the framework of being stoned to death, children under the age of 9 have a different status than other people because it's assumed that they don't actually understand what they're engaging in. No one's saying that you're allowed to have sex with them or you're not punished for them. I think you're lashed to death instead of being stoned to death. All right, fair enough? Checking in. Oh, by the way, that's a weird one also because they talk about whether or not what the punishment is for bestiality. And within the parameters of bestiality, there's also passive bestiality, of that you get a horse to fuck you, which at that point, do we need to punish you? I'm just saying, if you were just fucked from a horse, I feel like that was pretty bad. And like, if you didn't learn your lesson, what is lashing going to do at that point? All right. Moving on. If a goy hits a Jew, he must be killed. So this one's talking specifically, it breaks down the laws of what non-Jews are required to keep. There's 7 things versus the 613 that Jews have to keep. That's what they mean by the chosen people, is that we were chosen to be abused by God and keep more of his laws, whereas the non-Jews have to keep significantly less laws and they can still get into heaven. I don't even know where that appears on the page, but we're going to see in a minute that Jewish law absolutely prohibits killing non-Jews. So it's in context with the conversation of what non-Jews have to keep. I don't know where that specific line appears. All right, next one is when a Jew murders a Gentile, there will be no death penalty. So according to the people that I looked up, they referenced this and the next quote and say that neither one exists. All right, listen, this is all getting a little bit boring, so I'll just tell you the larger concepts that definitely rule this out. Okay, so I'm sorry. Let me go back. You see, this is why I knew I couldn't drink beforehand, because this shit is it's just like very technical. All right, this law over here, it says it's a Jew finds an object by a Gentile, it doesn't have to be returned. So there's a law within there's a Jewish law, if you find something, you have to make an effort to return it. However, you don't have to make an effort to return it if a person didn't think that they would ever see it again, because then it's considered like they basically, they gave up on it, and so it's a free object. Since non-Jews don't have the same law about returning lost objects, it's a little bit of game theory. It's assumed that when they lost something, they gave up ownership of it, so you don't have the same obligation. I don't know, it's a complicated game theory on this one. All right, we'll close it out with this last one because it also doesn't read well. Jews may use lies to circumvent a goy, which I think if there's a general tone of anti-Semitism, it's that Jews for some reason are allowed to cheat non-Jews. And so that one's kind of crazy because I looked up the case and it's actually that one's specifically talking to a government tax collector who doesn't actually have the authority of the government. And then it's talking about whether or not you actually can't steal from him, but if you're allowed to mislead a guy who's lying to you about his authority in terms of collecting your taxes. Or at least that was the argument that the other rabbis that I looked up on this were quoting. But I looked it up and it's actually a broader conversation about how you're not allowed to cheat or steal from non-Jews, which becomes actually the conclusion from that piece. And so they bring up a couple principles. One, there's a principle of that the laws of the land are the laws. In Hebrew, it's dina de machol. It doesn't matter. You guys don't speak Hebrew. Laws of the land are the laws. And so they got this a concept in Judaism that any government law, you are obligated to keep it as if it's from the Torah. Like any law, it doesn't matter what it is. In Jewish law, you can't speed. Actually, they're very anti-anarchists in the the Talmud, because their thing is any law, as long as it's not something that tells you that you specifically have to violate Jewish law, and even in that case, you could do it if they were going to kill you if you said otherwise. They were big into, and it's the concept that the law of the land is the law. So if you have a general law that you're not allowed to steal from people, you can't steal from people. And then there's another law about not desecrating God's name. And so they're actually more careful to not cheat non-Jews because they say that there's an added element of a desecration of God's name. Then they quote a case, and this is wild. that the proof for why you're not allowed to cheat non-Jews is, let's say there's a Jewish slave owned by a non-Jew. And by the way, it doesn't even address how the slave is owned, so I think it would include if non-Jews were to have conquered a territory during war and have taken Jewish slaves, you're not allowed to even use trickery to try and get the Jewish slave back. The only way that you can get the slave back is if you were to actually purchase the slave. So like, it's a pretty extreme example that even a Jewish slave owned by a non-Jew cannot be acquired by trickery. It's actually written in the original Bible. It's not in the oral law. And that's what's then used as the Torah proof for why you're not allowed to use trickery against non-Jews. So all of like just these earlier examples, it's not the actual law. And so just to show you guys the final law, because these are like the later commentators that just like give it to you straight. It is biblically forbidden to steal even a minor amount, even from a Gentile. It is forbidden to steal from him or cheat him. And if you stole from him or cheated him, you must return the stolen money or object. That's from this guy Maimonides. Yeah, I mean, you don't know who he is, but he's one of the later commentators who just gives you like the end law, because the Talmud is very cryptic and it just goes on and on with arguments. Here's the later commentary, same thing. Maimonides, of blessed memory, wrote that if one lesson is measures and thereby overcharges even to an idolatrous Gentile, one violates a negative commandment and must return the money. Similarly, it is forbidden to mislead Gentiles in calculating prices. As it says in Leviticus, he shall make a reckoning with his purchaser, even if it's subjugated your authority, even more so if the Gentile is not subjugated to your authority. And it says in Deuteronomy, for an abomination to the Lord, you, God, are unto his. And then here's just one more to conclude this. This is a later commentary also as well. It just gives you the conclusion to the Jewish law. Anyone who steals even a minor amount violates the prohibition of Leviticus. You shall not steal and is required to repay, whether one steals from a Jew or Gentile. So just to kind of give a button on it, like Jewish law, it's like incredibly technical. The Talmud just lays out arguments, and sometimes like they're within a very specific scope of like financial law. And so all of those earlier comments, like if you just want to look at the end law, we don't conclude with them, and like they're all taken out of context. And I don't know. I hope you guys got something for this. Thanks for hanging out with me.